It's a theological world. After all, after all, after all, after all.
How should belief in the Trinity shape the way Christians think about truth, reason, disagreement, even intellectual humility? Yeah, what do you think about that, Father Andrew? What do you think?
Yeah.
I see you have, what are all those toys in your background?
Oh, that's Dragon Ball Z, man, and Dragon Ball Super. We've got Super Saiyan Blue Goku, Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta, who's my favorite, Ultra Instinct Goku, Super Saiyan Beast Gohan, Super Saiyan Blue Vegito, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, the evil Frieza, and behind him, Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta, who's getting ready to blow his head off. And then right behind me, I have one of my favorite icons of Kimev's depiction of the resurrection and the harrowing of hell.
Interesting.
So, and
yeah, that's a great icon.
That's the classic mascot for Ole Miss, Colonel Reb.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, that tells us a lot about you.
Toddy.
Yeah, that tells us a lot about you.
You can't see them, but and here's the thing. These are just the Dragon Ball Z figures you can see in my office. I've also got more icons. I've got a Godzilla figure. I have a Charles Spurgeon bobblehead that someone gave me. I've never read anything by Spurgeon, so I'm not really sure why I have that, but someone gave it to me at an ETS conference. I think it was someone at the Zondervan table gave it to me. But yeah, I'm thinking about cleaning some of this up. And
nice. I got a Zondervan mug, but you got a bobblehead. That's even better. Okay.
They like me more than you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm used to it. Okay. So yeah, how would you answer that? How does Trinity actually shape the way Christians think about truth, reason, disagreement, even intellectual humility? Especially if we don't know what the Trinity is.
Well, I'm not entirely. So how to think about truth? I mean, there's always this classic sense in which Jesus himself claims to be the truth, right? And whatever. If I'm being honest, I don't really know what he means about that, because in my analytic mind, I'm thinking of truth in terms of correspondence. So Jesus is that which corresponds to reality. Does that entail he's not reality? That's where I don't know what to make of that statement.
Yeah. Right.
So one of the things that I have found helpful in the past, and it could be complete nonsense and incoherent, but I'm a fan of the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, and Peirce I don't think gets enough love. He usually, if we're being honest, he doesn't get a lot of attention in a lot of Christian contexts. Many Christian theologians have never even heard the name before. But Peirce was very helpful, and he had this very interesting phenomenology. And he thought that he described the world of experience. His word for that was the Phaneron, and it's called the Phaneron from the Greek idea of revealing or manifesting, the world of the manifest, if you will. And Peirce said that the Phaneron, the world of experience, it's always constituted by three categories. There was firstness. So like if I'm experiencing this case for my headphones, right? It's gray in color, right?
Yeah.
Firstness would be I have this feeling or this impression of greatness. It's called the feeling of greatness. But what is that? I honestly don't know what a feeling of greatness is, but that's where it begins, right? But then we ask, why do I have this feeling of greatness? Because there is this second category, or what Peirce called secondness. Sometimes he called it bruteness. And it's this category that pushes or forces the feeling of greatness upon me. Because here's the thing, I'm not choosing to be appeared to grayly. There's something not only am I feeling greatness, do I have an impression of greatness, but something is impressing the feeling of greatness upon me. And it's something that's distinct from myself. Peirce would oftentimes call the second category bruteness. He would sometimes call it difference. Sometimes he would call firstness presence. I have a feeling that there's a presence of greatness. Why? Because there's something distinct from me that is pushing greatness upon me. But then Peirce said, but that's not the whole story. There's a third category. How do I make sense of this experience? What explains why I'm able to cognize or comprehend the feeling of greatness and that something is impressing greatness upon me? Because there's a third category. He called it, go figure, thirdness. But he also calls it the category of mediation. That not only am I having a feeling of greatness and it's being impressed upon me by something distinct from myself, but there's something that is mediating those two things together, that's mediating the impressing and the impression. This third category, he typically says, is constituted by way of signs. A sign is anything which can stand to someone for something in some respect or capacity. Right?
Yeah.
Signs for Peirce are also triadic. You have a sign is constituted by an object. For example, I'm looking at this object here that we would call a microphone. Test.
Yeah.
But when I look at this, it kind of generates an idea for me. And I use that word generates intentionally. The word microphone appears into my mind. When I look down, I see a microphone, the word microphone pops in my head. I didn't do this on purpose. Kind of generate, it gives rise to it. That word microphone is what Peirce would call the Representamen, or the sign vehicle. The microphone would be the object. The word or the concept of my mind would be called the Representamen, or the sign vehicle. But what is it that connects that word microphone to this object? Well, there's another sign that Peirce called the Interpretant. It's kind of like a definition of sorts. We might think of it kind of like a definition is a kind of interpretant, right? The word definition is like, what's the word microphone mean? Well, it means this. And that's what helps me to realize, oh, this word is representing this thing. And I know that because this definition is mediating the word microphone to the object. Does that make sense? So if we think of truth, right?
Yeah.
If we think of this in terms of the Trinity, because Peirce was thoroughly convinced that his view of the sign, as well as his phenomenological categories, were perfect representations of the actual Trinity. Peirce was a somewhat progressive Christian. So if we think of the Son being the truth, or we might think in terms of like, for example, the relationship between reality and propositions. That there is something in existence which we call God. It seems to be there's going to be some kind of, if God exists, then there is a necessary concomitant of now there is a true proposition that exists, that namely God exists, right?
Yeah.
You got the actual state of affairs. It's given rise to this proposition. But what mediates that proposition to the state of affairs? There's going to need to be some kind of other mediating sign, what we call some kind of interpretant. So if you think of it something like that, what makes the proposition true? God exists. Well, the definitions of those words and of that statement are going to have some kind of mediating function of the proposition to the actual state, the concrete state of affairs, which it's representing. So in that sense, you could say there is a triadic dynamic to what truth is, or at least the experience of truth, if we're thinking in terms of phenomenology. So maybe it helps us think about truth in that sense. It could be complete nonsense, but I find it kind of interesting. It does seem to map onto, more creedal views of the Trinity than we realize. You talked about truth, so that's a way they could help think about that. So I like to think of it more so like this. If Peirce is right about his phenomenological categories, and if it's right that these happen to mirror the Trinity, then maybe there's just something about how the experience of reality in general, whether we realize it or not, all of our cognition is just shaped in a Trinitarian fashion. That it's shaped by this, because the purpose of secondness is kind of mirrored to an extent of what the purpose of what is a representative or a sign vehicle to? It represents, it makes known. What is it that the Son does? He makes the Father known. That which is unknowable, he makes known. Well, how does he do that? Because the Spirit mediates the Son to the Father. So maybe it just is the case that all of our experience of the world is just via God's creation is shaped in this Trinitarian dynamic. This is in this process Peirce called semiosis, and Peirce was very well aware, hey, this whole semiosic process has very much a Trinitarian dynamic to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very open to it. He has a whole spiel about his views, what he called evolutionary in love, that we're not going to get into. So maybe it's we think about truth kind of like that. Maybe it is that we think of, hey, maybe all of our thinking has a Trinitarian dynamic. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Son is called the Word or the Logos in the New Testament.
Right.
The Logos is seen as being sometimes a word or a concept of reason itself, of the rationality of the universe for the Stoics. Maybe there's something to an extent to which this is all at play. And maybe that's one of the ways that the Trinity, I think St. Augustine really probably does the best job on this, and how he thinks of the Logos as representing, helping us to think about reason, how it helps us think about cognition, how it thinks about, because he has a whole good bit about this kind of stuff in his little work on the teacher and on Christian doctrine as well. So maybe it just is, it's like that. Maybe that's a way it could help us think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Yeah, whether or not we go in the Peircean direction directly or not, I think it points to the idea that there is something about the way in which Christians think, in the way that they relate to the world. Relating to the world is, well, you might say that's relating to the world is a way of thinking, or at least it's going to have some kind of it's going to have some sort of influence or shaping in the context of thinking and how it is that we conceive of the world. And
I think it's definitely intellectual, because as you, I'm a substance dualist. I am a Cartesian, and I think that's a very helpful distinction. That not just Descartes, but especially Augustine draws. He does this all throughout the Study of God and plenty other places. He makes a difference between the sensible and the intellectual. And if we are most fundamentally souls, that is the most fundamental thing that we are. A soul, if we are intellectual substances, we're also never going to be without our ideas. But our ideas are always mediated to us somehow. By words, if you will, by signs. You know, I can't help but think about the way the Logos theologians, as well as Augustine himself, will talk about the Father is never without his word. The Father is, Christ is called the wisdom of God by St. Paul. The Father is never without his wisdom. But yet he is somehow the grounds of that wisdom, right? He is the ground of his word, which is, you know, so I think there's a lot of to be done with the substance dualism and stuff like this, which you've promoted a lot with Soul Science Ministries. I think there's a lot there, and I think it especially makes sense, you know, in light that physicalism is just not true, and that dualism is almost certainly true. I think it makes even more sense in light of that. And I know I'm being a little dismissive of physicalism, but it's just because I just don't know how one honestly can take that seriously and take the Bible seriously at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And it is related. I agree. I don't think it's not only odd but it's I think practically speaking, the implications are there that if you are a materialist, that you have to jettison in practice certain theological ideas that are important to being a Christian. So Christianity and materialism are at odds with one another. They're inconsistent. They're unhelpful, unhelpfully related. And so, because materialism is, even if we look at this not in terms of ontology, but in this context that we're talking about, in epistemology, you might say that in epistemology, materialism provides a kind of reductive framework that necessarily eliminates the first-person perspective. I think this is right in terms of kind of the first-person phenomenological perspective that we're talking about in this context, the phenomenology of experiencing the material objects themselves. Material objects themselves, if they're understood aright in light of the world, they're going to be understood in some ways in relation to their in relation in their environment. And their environment, well, certainly for Christians, the environment that we exist in, that we phenomenologically exist in, is broader than the physical environment itself. And so, I mean, following somebody like Richard Fumerton, the reason why the phenomenological perspective is so important is because it's something that's directly accessible or available at least to us as knowers. We are first-person knowers first. And the third-person way of knowing is indirect. It's mediated by the first-person way of knowing. So the body itself, even our bodies, are indirectly related or mediated by the first-person concepts that we have about it. And to invert the process epistemically, to make the third-person way of knowing the body first as the explanatory ground for the first-person perspective, the phenomenological perspective, would be to do injustice to the first-person perspective in a way that makes it reductive and effectively eliminates the perspective. So,
yeah, and not to mention, I just can't wrap my head around what an idea is supposed to be on the materialist story. And when I close my eyes and I can picture my wife, and once it's like I can actually see of sorts an image, but there's no physical thing there for me to see. Why is it I can have an image that is not material in my mind of something that's not even present to me? I have no idea how the materialist can account for that or tell me what that is, because if it's just an event of my brain state, right? It was just a brain event. Why is it? Right. I don't see how that's explained by neurons and by just a brain state. I just can't get my head around. When I close my eyes and I picture someone, there's nothing physical about it. Right. There is a non-physical, there is an immaterial image in my brain that if physicalism is true, we should be able to look at the brain and say, oh, this image is actually this kind of neurological particles or something like that. Like, I don't know biology, but but they should be able to say something like that, but they can't.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I know I'm getting off subject, but I do think it does
you're right.
tied up in some of this Trinitarian reflection on what it means to know, what it means to reason, what it means to know truth. Because I think there's more at play in what it means to be the image of God and stuff in relation to the Trinity, and all these things are all held together. But I'll digress for now.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. But we can. I think this
another
question
episode
of knowledge. Maybe. Yeah, I think this question of knowledge is important, and making sure that we're not being reductive in terms of how we understand knowledge. This is why knowledge is inclusive of virtue and formation, and so virtue and formation are important facets of how it is that we know, the world, and the way in which we come to know the world as well. So let's. How does this Trinity speak outside the church? How does this Trinity speak outside the church? Does it have anything to say? Let's say in a world that's shaped by machines, and I think this is I'm opening up a big can of worms here. This is a big can of worms, but it's related to this problem with kind of reductionistic knowledge that I think is problematic in the world around us, that is being ever growing and shaped by the kind of what some would call the scientistic way of knowing the world, or what Neil Postman calls the growing development or evolution of scientism toward technopoly. We're just going to scratch the surface barely on Trinitarian knowledge and how that relates. a world that we're in right now that is shaped by machines, systems, impersonal forces, does Trinitarian theology really have anything to say about knowledge?
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but Peirce would think so.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he doesn't lay this out in direct conversation to the Trinity per se, but he's also quite clear. Hey, it's too much of a coincidence that these things, because it was Peirce's whole triadic phenomenology and the triadic dynamic of semiosis that he saw that's what makes science possible. Because every act of knowing, he said, requires these three categories of firstness, secondness, and thirdness, of the feeling of something, the bruteness of that which is external, impressing it upon us, and then that which is mediating those three things together. Peirce said that's active in all forms of knowing, but if it's that way in all forms of knowing, then it's the same is true for science, the scientific way of knowing. And Peirce would know that. He was a chemist. He spent the majority of his life in the laboratory. He was actually a great polymath. He did work for the chemistry agencies for the government in the 19th century. It's quite fascinating. He's also made incredible advancements with linear algebra. It's mind-blowing what all he did. And as I said earlier, he invented the truth table for discerning the truth function of propositions. Peirce would think that, yes, it is this whole triadic dynamic of all phenomenological experience and of semiosis that makes all knowing possible. And he would have just thought, and I think rightly so, that to separate this, that when you ask the question, why is it that this is the way the world just happens to be, he would say, because the evolutionary love, which he sees as God, that brings about the world is this way. And he has created this world in such a way to reflect himself. He gets into some really strange stuff that I don't really endorse in his work on evolutionary love, but he sees this concept of evolutionary love, which is essentially triadic, and I'll call it triune. It is what motivates all of biological and chemical evolution. He sees it as wrought all throughout the universe. Peirce thought that the entire universe was caught up in this never-ending triadic process of semiosis because it's imaging the creator.
Yeah, I like this idea of Peirce. I think there's something to what Peirce is saying.
You gotta be careful with it though, because this is also this idea that all of reality, and he meant all of reality, down to like electrons and subatomic particles, are participating in some kind of semiosic process. It's what gives rise to his panpsychism.
Yeah.
So
That's
you don't want to take it too far.
Exploring. Yeah, that's something certainly worth exploring.
It's also debatable whether he would have called himself a panpsychist, because he saw himself as an idealist. So now I know there's a weird relationship between idealism and panpsychism, or at least in some idealists and some panpsychists. But for Peirce, he really thought that mind in this sense was very much fundamental to reality. He was very much an idealist in this sense.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree with him. I think at some level, Christian theists are idealists of some sort. I mean, at least in terms of explanatory resources, at some point you have to appeal to the divine mind to explain things. So at bedrock,
even further,
kind of idealism is true.
In another case of back to how he points to this, and I think it does connect to science, and we are getting back to the machine stuff. There's a flourishing field called biosemiotics, which it's a way of talking about how biological organisms behave semiotically. So here's an example. A virus, an invader to my body, invades my body, right? What happens? A response is triggered by my body to send antibodies, right? Or antivirus, whatever of the bias. It sends, let's call it a bacteria. Virus is a bad example. A bacterium invades my body. My body responds. It sends antibodies to go and fight it. How does the body know to do that? The body got an impression. It got a feeling of invader. Something was impressing itself upon it. And there was somehow the body, the cellular organs in our body, at the cellular level there is a mediation between the invader impressing this feeling upon invasion upon the body, and the body is able to mediate that and respond accordingly. It motivates behavior, and it does it without conscious thinking. Now, if you're a panpsychist, you say, no, it's conscious. But it seems to know how to do that. Amoeba seem to know that when there is I don't know what it is that amoeba eat, but when they come across that, they know to eat it. It sends a signal, and they interpret it, and they make anyway. Yeah. So there's a whole there's a whole fields of zoosemiotics, of biosemiotics. There's a whole plethora and a whole world. Zygon years back did a whole special issue, 2 issues I think it was, on papers of semiotics and the sciences and religion. I think Andrew Robinson was one of the editors of those special issues. But if we do think of that, and if we think in terms of let's smuggle in some Christianity here, and if you're a committed Trinitarian Christian and you're thinking, hey, this all seems to make great sense. If there is a triune God who has created the world to reflect his properties of truth, goodness, and beauty, right, in his creation, then if God is caught up in an eternal semi-triadic process of what we might call it, whether it's the eternal relations of origin or however you want to work that out, should we be that surprised that fundamental to all experience of all life in the created world is also caught up in this triadic dynamic?
Yeah. No, we shouldn't. I mean, at one level, if it's true, if we really believe it, it shouldn't be all that surprising. But I think I actually am. I'm attracted to Peirce and other figures who take Trinitarian knowledge a lot more seriously.
Just so you know, the Peirce enthusiasts, they're going to want to correct you and say it's Peirce, it's not Peirce. It's pronounced like the bag men don't.
Well,
carry.
I just showed my ignorance there. Yeah,
it's okay.
I'm certainly not a Peirce. I would not even claim to be competent in Peirce, but I think
I've read it. He's one of the most impenetrable philosophers I've tried to read. Like I've understood a lot more, but I've had to wrestle and fight with him a lot. He's an interesting guy, but there's also a lot wrong in Peirce as well.
But I do think there's something important to what he's getting after. I mean, I remember even in seminary, I'll just throw this out there really quick and move on, because there's so much we could explore about this, and we probably should focus on maybe another episode on Trinitarian knowledge and dive a little deeper into some of these models that are on offer, because I think it's relevant today as we seek to kind of make sense of or provide some kind of sense to the AI world that we're living in and the kind of knowledge that it's actually producing, because I think it is producing a certain kind of knowledge that we're unaware of, and we have to navigate it as Christians. And I think it's precisely at this point that is so important, at the point of phenomenology that Peirce is talking about in terms of consciousness. So consciousness is something, I mean, there's lots of discussions around consciousness and the whole AI phenomena right now, and how do we make sense of that? There's a lot of philosophers and neuroscientists who are talking about this, of course. The theologians, well, I mean, I don't think they're doing a lot right now in terms of this question of Trinitarian consciousness or Trinitarian knowledge. I remember in my Reformed context reading John Frame in his book, The Doctrine of the Knowledge of God, and at the end of it, he came up with this kind of a lot of fun, pithy kind of analogies, kind of short, that he would just kind of throw out there. I think he's just having fun there, and some of it I thought he was basically making these Trinitarian analogies to the world around him and to nature, which has been done before historically. I mean, Edwards does this in his preaching, and I think there's something right about it. You see it in the German theologian Wolfhart Pannenberg to some extent, and it's been around, but it's so foreign to us that it seems disconnected to the way in which we think and how we appropriate information in the world. and so John Frame comes up with all sorts of stuff like, you know, 3-leaf clovers and all sorts of things that don't seem very, some of the analogies seem like, okay, there's something substantive here. Some of the others, it seems like he's just kind of playing in a sandbox, and I'm not sure what to make of that. But there's something at the intersection here that's right. There's something about the formational wisdom tradition that is not simply theistic or monotheistic. Even, I mean, you have lots of mystics throughout history who are operating out of a kind of monotheism, but then you have also very deeply entrenched Christian mystics who are operating out of a Trinitarian way of understanding the world, and it's shaping how they're seeing the world and how they're even experiencing their environment. And I think that's important for how it is that we navigate the next world that we're in as pastor theologians.
I think that's right. And just to clarify, these aren't just my own like thoughts about all of this that are coming out. Others who have written and talked about the usefulness of this kind of semiosic way of thinking about reality and all these things in terms of the Trinity. Andrew Robinson has probably done the best work on this in his book, God in the World of Signs. He has a more pop level friendly book called Traces of the Trinity, where he really connects this thought to sacramentology and the idea of a sacramental reality, which I think there's a lot there for how we think about participatory metaphysics, especially. But even Peter Leithart has talked about. I think he has a book on vestiges of the Trinity as well. So
yes,
and in a more Pentecostal context, Amos Young, he has a helpful book called Spirit Word Community, where he is interacting a lot with Peirce's concepts, phenomenology, and view of the sign. We're talking about ecclesiology, Christian experience of the world, and even biblical hermeneutics, even how we read the scriptures.
Good. So, yeah, that's
it's not just mind making this up as I go. So it's not there's several thinkers from different ecclesial contexts who are finding use in some of these concepts and going into all of that. But as far as how to make sense of machines go, I guess I'm going to want to push back and say machines don't embody life.
Okay.
And so and if they don't embody life, then there's something about them that is going to prevent them from, say, like a full access of this triune or semiosic experience. There's something that's going to be missing from it. Because it's not, because even though they might, I'm not really sure what it means for a machine to recognize an object. I know what it means for a machine to have a representamen or a signed vehicle, but it's not clear to me it's not clear to me that they can really have access to any kind of robust interpretant that could mediate words to objects and such. It seems like they're relying on us to do the work for them. There's something that's missing there. But also, what I think is even more interesting, looking at how this has impacted all of this, like through the Peircean lens, at least. If it is this evolutionary love, if Peirce likes to conceive of the triadic movement of the whole universe, that's motivating biological and even chemical evolution and bringing the world about in creation, Peirce might encourage us to look forth and say, what does the Trinity give us, and how does this triune insight seems to give us more? This triune doctrine seems to give us more insight to what it means that God is the God of life than we've realized. That if the life of God is this eternal, never ceasing, triadic dynamic, then maybe that should clue us into what does it mean that God has created a living creation. Anywho, so those are just more speculation. That's more speculation.
No, but I think that's good. I think there's something there.
I do think there's something there, especially because I want to pursue things such as sacramental ontology or participatory metaphysics. I think there's got to be more there for how the Trinity is factoring into this. Even if you don't want to go the Peircean route, Augustine gives you a way as to have this. Augustine, when he talked about Trinitarian knowledge, he just believed it was the Logos itself that mediated all truth and all knowledge to individuals. He talks about the difference between the knowledge of things and the knowledge of signs. We only have knowledge of things because of our knowledge of signs. But he was like, but there's got to be something that connects the sign to the thing. And Augustine said it was the Logos himself who does that in us. It's part of his illumination theory of epistemology. So that's another way you could try and cash this out.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think I don't want to get too in the weeds on that right now. I think that's a pretty heavy issue that is important and relevant to this discussion. But I think I think this is why at one level, well, this is what you just said about the incarnation comes back around to the more pastor-scholar life that you're living or trying to live as a priest theologian. There's an importance about the nature of how it is that we do life together in liturgy, preaching, and catechesis. Here's a real practical question, but I think it does have implications for this wider discussion about knowledge or Christian epistemology in relation to the machine itself. The machine way of learning is, I think, I agree with you, it's deeply representational. It's not actual knowledge. There's something that's brought to bear on it that is missing when we enter into that mode of thinking or living. But very practical question: how should Trinitarian theology show up in preaching, catechesis, and liturgy?
Well, if you're committed to historic liturgies, as are Anglicans, Roman Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox, it's already that heavy lifting has been done for you. For example, the Book of Common Prayer. If we look at our church uses the 1662 liturgy. It begins, and as most Anglican liturgies do, it begins. It actually has a very triune unfolding. It begins with the time of the law, where we go over. We begin the service with the recitation of all the 10 commandments, and we respond to each of the commandments. Lord, have mercy upon us and incline our hearts to keep this law. We recite that. We begin with the law that we see as the Father has handed down to humanity. But then as we enter into the preaching of the Word, we enter into a time that seems to be shaped by the Son, following the reading of the Gospel and the confession of the Creed. We enter into the time of the Word, or the Logos, if you will, as we preach and we receive these things. And then as we enter into the time of the Holy Eucharist, which at our church we have an explicit epiclesis where we invoke the Holy Spirit to come down and to consecrate these elements and to change them into the body and blood of our Lord. I think in many sense the shape of the liturgy is triune in this sense. But maybe you don't want to quite look at it that way. Maybe you want to think even more practical. I think pastors should actually preach doctrine. And as I said earlier, our church, we're doing a sermon series this year on the 39 Articles of Religion. And we are teaching doctrine similar to how I would in a classroom, but attuned to why it matters for us and how we live out our everyday spiritual lives. I think that's very practical. I think if we will be faithful to those historic liturgies that have been handed down to us, I think there is already an implicit catechesis that's already, again, a lot of the heavy lifting has been done for us by our fathers. And I think it's foolish for us to just dismiss those so quickly, as even how some within Anglicanism dismiss it. There are many Anglicans that aren't very true to the liturgy set down in the prayer book, but they definitely have what I think is a triune movement through them. If nothing else, as you pray the daily office, you're learning to pray the Trinity. You're invoking the Trinity every time we say the Gloria Patri, glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Our liturgy should be shaped and done in such a way that when we hear the word God, the first thing that should pop in our minds is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's what liturgy does. It has a very formative impact on us. And I think it does contribute even to knowing as we attempt to do catechesis. So I would say the first step in good catechesis is have a good liturgy. Because it does so much of it for us, but also preach doctrine, preach the Nicene Creed. We confess it every Sunday. Walk your congregation through what it means. Yeah, those are just some ways.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think, I think that's right. I think that's good. You've said a lot about Trinitarian knowledge in the context of not being too reductive. You've said a lot about Trinitarian knowledge in terms of kind of the importance of liturgy, as liturgy supplies us with a how to know, a different way of knowing, and even
It's a participatory knowledge.
Yeah, and even what we know, it changes it. So, okay, so very briefly, why? And I think that ties into this question: why Anglicanism? Why are you Anglican? And why does this matter? Why does Anglicanism matter in this context of Christian knowledge, Trinitarian ways of thinking about the world?
Yeah, so why Anglicanism? Because I do believe that good Christians confess the faith handed down by the apostles, the faith once handed down by the saints to the apostles. Holy Scripture, especially the New Testament, it contains their explicit teachings of. We have in the New Testament, we have two biographies written by Jesus' followers themselves, the eyewitnesses. All four of the Gospels are eyewitness testimony. We've got numerous letters of St. Paul, who experienced the risen Lord, epistles by St. Peter, epistles by St. John, son of Zebedee, and yes, I am committed to that. Letters by his own brothers. We have apostolic testimony, and I think that should have the supreme authority for how we think about God, and that the canon should shape our experience of God. And I think it should, and I think the canon, because it contains the actual explicit testimony of the apostles as well as Israel's prophets, that has to somehow have an authority over and above the church's ecclesial tradition. As the church, we are the bride of Christ, but also part and parcel of that, Christ being the bridegroom, he is the head of the church. And if it is Christ who is borne witness to in the word, there's something about that word, the authority that he gives, the bridegroom gives to his apostles, that has to be able to correct and lead us, the bride. So, and I think the Anglican way, because of its emphasis on, I don't like sola scriptura, I'll call it Suprema Scriptura, following the Baptist theologian, James Leo Garrett Jr.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Suprema Scriptura. I think that it gives us a better way of living that out, better than our Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters. Also, because when I experience the Anglican liturgies, while they have much in common with the liturgies of our Eastern and Roman brothers and sisters, I think they have a good bit more that they offer as well. I think there's a different kind of richness and beauty to them, and maybe that's a subjective evaluation. But they seem to also be shaped more by the canon itself than in some of the other liturgies.
Yeah,
so that's why good. Anglican to me. Also, Anglicanism gives me a broader fence to explore more theological and doctrinal ideas. Gives me a bigger playground and less restrictions, which I think is since I think that that ecclesial authority of the church is fallible. I think that's healthier for us. Gives us more room to correct and move forward.
Yeah, good. I think that's fair. That's fair. That's good. That's a good encouragement to take or think about Anglicanism seriously in light of these ways of knowing that we've been talking about. One of the persistent temptations of modern Christianity is to treat doctrine as something we affirm but do not inhabit. What today's conversation reminds us of is that the doctrine of the Trinity is not simply an abstract puzzle although there's much abstraction there's much that we could think about abstractly in terms of the puzzles that it brings to us. It is the actual grammar of the Christian faith. So in that way, it shapes and informs Christian worship, liturgies, and the foundations of Christian thinking itself, as we've discussed. When the church loses confidence in theology, it doesn't become more practical, it actually becomes thinner. And when pastors and scholars are separated, both suffer because it requires both, as Ian McGilchrist puts it, both sides of both hemispheres that are brought together, clarity of the theologian and the practice or liturgies of the pastors and the practical theologians. The Trinity calls us back to a vision of reality grounded in communion, distinction without division, and unity without a collapse. It invites us not only to believe the right kinds of things, although, yeah, that's important, but also to think, to pray, to live differently. In other words, to inhabit the theology that we believe in, that we live out in some way, in some form. We are given a form in liturgy, as Father Andrew has described. So thanks for listening to It's a Theological World After All. If this episode challenged or clarified your thinking, I encourage you to share it, follow. More importantly, to keep thinking theologically about God, the God we worship, and the world we're called to serve. Follow us online. Consider supporting us as well. You can see us on YouTube, any of the major platforms. Also find us at soulscienceministries.com.